what we argue in this book is that your beliefs about happiness themselves are the key, because it's those beliefs that sort of create the world in which you live in. And it's particularly your belief about what you think happiness means. We all have beliefs about different things, but your belief specifically what happiness means gives rise to what we call a world, or which we term sort of your life condition, right? And that's sort of, think about it as sort of the character of your inner life. It's the way you experience the world, your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, your energy level. All those things come together to create the way you sort of experience the world. So you have these beliefs that then sort of create these life conditions, these worlds which you see things in and where you exist. We argue there's 10 of those states, 10 of those life states or worlds. And core to each of them is a belief you cling to that keeps you there. Now, we will get into the fact that you can move in on to different worlds, but we argue that everybody has sort of a core belief, which is the most prominent belief they have, and they probably spend the most time in that world.
I'm Casey Main, a jaded, hopelessly romantic, health-conscious party girl searching for meaning. And my mission is simple: to make life better, for myself and for you. I believe real change always comes from within, and the Better You podcast was born to discover hidden parts of ourselves and our stories. A safe place where we have real, honest conversations with people from all walks of life to help better understand ourselves so we can become better versions of ourselves. So come along on this journey of discovery with me so you can become a better you. Back to another episode of the Better You podcast. I'm your host, Casey Main. Thank you, as always, so much for being here and for tuning in and checking out the show. If this is your first time or if you've been listening for a long time, I very much appreciate it. So I always want to express that gratitude because I know that there are a lot of podcasts out there. There is a lot of media out there to consume. So really, your time is very precious, and the fact that you are choosing to spend it with me just really, really means a lot. If you are new to the show, then know that this podcast is focused on better understanding our relationship with ourselves. And as I mentioned in the short little take on current events, I'm not even sure I would call that an episode, that I aired last week, I've kind of been struggling a little bit with how to handle the podcast given everything that's currently going on in the world and all of the, or more specifically our country here in the United States, and all of the feelings, all of the hurt, all of the anger. And I battled with whether or not I should pause on airing episodes, and ultimately I decided not to do that, obviously, because I wasn't sure how that could help. I want to continue to provide this outlet to people who want to go deeper into themselves to better understand themselves and their internal programming and how they show up in the world and how they interact in the world. Because while there is a lot of change that needs to happen in our external world and country and society and culture right now, all of that change always happens on the individual level and internally. So I do believe very much in the quote, be the change you want to see in the world. So I think it does have to start with each of us individually and figuring out how we are contributing to society. And I don't mean in terms of what you are doing. I mean more in like, how are you showing up and what are your views, your deep rooted internal views? Like, do they lean towards equality? Do they lean towards inequality? What makes you uncomfortable? What are the feelings that you're having surrounding everything that's going on? And then dig into those and why. And so I wanted to stay true to the podcast in being a place for people to come to try to better understand themselves. And if you are heavily involved and really reacting strongly to what's going on, then you can kind of listen to all these conversations and try and apply them to the current situation. If you are feeling overwhelmed by the news cycle and maybe need a break from it, which is totally fine. Don't feel guilty about that. Even like the most ardent of activists have to take a break and rest for a minute. Like that's one of those bigger themes that we talk about a lot in this podcast is kind of taking that time for yourself to rest and rejuvenate and recover so that you can then be your best self and really show up in whatever activities you're doing. But if you need a break from everything, then, you can listen to these conversations separate from everything that's currently going on. And I do want to point out that the podcast episode that airs today, as well as the ones that aired last week, were all recorded back in the beginning of May. So that's why none of the conversations are mentioning what's going on, but instead they are mentioning coronavirus, because back in the beginning of May, that was really what was consuming everybody's minds. And I still have a couple more episodes that I recorded earlier in May, and I think I'm going to air those over the next couple weeks as I originally planned, but I'm not entirely sure. That could change. I'm still trying to figure out the best way to go about this and navigate this. And so just know that as you listen to this conversation, or if you listen to last week's, when we're talking about what's going on in the world like that is referring to coronavirus and that pandemic and the quarantining and all of that, because these conversations were recorded over a month ago, or around a month ago at this point in time. And I do also want to point out that, we all react differently and we all work on change in our own ways. And I'm seeing a lot of stuff right now on social media, especially, that is really giving very strong opinions about how people should feel, what people should do. And I believe a lot of that stems from a good place of just feeling very passionate about this topic, which I completely understand. But I also believe that adding judgment to the mix doesn't help. So some people, your outlet is more on the political and activism stage. My outlet is obviously more communication, writing, and this podcast. Maybe your outlet is just taking an honest stock of your own internal views and privileges or lack of privileges, and how that plays out in your life and what you can do to educate yourself or change that. And the world needs all the different reactions. So I think an important thing to pay attention to as we continue to navigate this is that everybody reacts differently, and that's okay. People process things differently, and how they process things, there's a whole lot leading up to that. Your childhood influences, your experiences in life, your views, your beliefs, just all of it comes with you into how you react and how you process things. And to think that everything would be the same or should be the same is really leaning more towards judgment and not necessarily embracing all of our differences, which I think is a key point in all of this. But personally, for me, I do feel very pulled to further educate myself on the subject. And as I mentioned in the little take on current events thing that I aired, part of the reason I'm not switching this podcast to be a real platform about that is first of all, like I am a white privileged female. And so my perspective on it is in line with the perspective that has for too long overshadowed other perspectives. So I don't think it's for me to sit here and necessarily talk about my views. I want to more help amplify views that have been overlooked for too long. And so one of the things that I'm working on is potentially tackling my first kind of real journalism. I'm not sure if you would call it investigative journalism, but writing on a more serious topic. If you follow my writing, then I write mostly lifestyle type stuff at this point in time. But I've always been very intrigued by the concept of investigative journalism. And so talking to a bunch of people, getting a bunch of different sides and viewpoints and historical facts and psychological insights and, political timelines and kind of how it's all played together with none of my viewpoints or my input. It's not from my perspective. It is instead from several different perspectives. So I hesitate to say that I'm for sure going to write my first, real journalism piece, but I'm going to say that because I'm at least going to try. So I have my first interview scheduled for next week with the CEO of a local organization that is heavily, heavily involved in advocacy, research, training, and programs involving injustice and inequality, mostly specific to my community and the state of Florida. But I know that they also have ties and do research on a broader level. So I have that first conversation, that first interview scheduled, and then I'm going to see where that leads. And hopefully maybe I can write my first piece that would live maybe in the local newspaper or on a more current events type site. I'm not really sure. This is a new type of writing for me, but if anything, I'm excited to educate myself. Although I know a lot of the stuff I'm going to learn is probably going to be upsetting, but if you've been following this podcast, you know that I like to understand, I seek to understand, and I want to understand how we got to this point and why it's continued. So like, where did it stem from, and what has fueled it to continue for so long? And I believe that is a combination of politics, psychology, history, and I want to look at all of that. And I might air those conversations as episodes as I go down this journey. I'm not sure yet. I'm going to see how they go. So if you've kind of been thinking, why am I not talking about this? Why am I not sharing my thoughts? Why am I not changing the podcast to focus on these issues? It's I don't feel educated enough to do so. And I think that doing so in an uneducated fashion certainly does not help the issue. So that is what I've got going on. So then for next week's episode, I'm not entirely sure what I will air. My original schedule was to air a conversation on friendship with a science journalist. And it's a really cool way to look at friendship because it is from a more biological and scientific perspective. And then actually, I believe I had planned to air 2 episodes next week. So that conversation and then an additional conversation about a very, very unique friendship. And I might still air those, or I might switch depending on how my interview goes next week. I'm not sure yet. So stay tuned for that. But this episode, I think, is super interesting, especially in conjunction with last week's episode with Dr. Chubak, because my guess would be that the quote unquote world, in this conversation, we're going to talk about these 10 different worlds of happiness. And I believe that the world that we all come from, like my guess would be that a lot of that depends on some of that internal programming that we talked about with Dr. Chubak last week that we pick up very early in life in terms of like how we view the world. So I think this conversation can be applied to what's going on in the world today, or just your life in general, and as well as the people in your life. And you can kind of start to realize, okay, this is what world I think I'm from. This is what world I think they're from. And it's all about like what your beliefs are in terms of happiness. And I do recommend that you take the quiz, which is available on the 10worlds.com website, short quiz, and you can figure out what world you come from or what world you spend the most time in, which I think would be really interesting to look up prior to listening to this conversation. So if you're not driving, if you're at home or at work or on your computer, then press pause, go to the 10worlds.com and take that quiz to figure out which world you're in or which world you come from. And I think that would just make it super interesting to listen to this conversation. It'll be interesting regardless, but if you can look up what world you're from now before you continue listening, that would be fun. All right, so a little bit about our guest today. Ash Eldifrawi has built a reputation as a thought leader in clinical, social, and consumer psychology. He began his career as a clinical psychologist before transitioning into work as a marketing executive for some of the most prestigious and innovative companies in the world. Ash received his bachelor's degree in biology and master's degree in social science from the University of Chicago, where he also conducted clinical research in the areas of neurology and biopsychology. He earned his doctorate in clinical psychology from the Chicago School of Psychology, completed his internship at the world-renowned Family Institute at Northwestern, and then went on to be the inaugural fellow at the Center for Family Health at the University of Chicago. Ash is still a licensed clinical psychologist. After transitioning to a career in marketing, he has held senior positions at companies including Google, McKinsey, Wrigley, Gogo, and currently Redbox. He's been featured in The Economist, Forbes, Bloomberg, Fast Money, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, CNBC, Mashable, Crain's Chicago Business, MarketWatch, and Recode. Ash also co-wrote a television pilot called Sessions that was optioned by DreamWorks Television. He lives in Illinois with his family, and he comes from the world of Tranquility. And in this episode, we discuss what led him and his co-author to write the book, The 10 Worlds of Happiness, and why they felt it was so important. How all our different beliefs about happiness can be boiled down to 10 core beliefs. The relationship between your unique beliefs about happiness and your life. How our base life condition affects how we view and interact with life. And then we go through each world, so a description as well as the core belief or delusion about happiness that drives that world. And those worlds are hell, hunger, animality, anger, tranquility, rapture, learning, realization, compassion, and then the 10th world, enlightenment, which does not have a core belief or delusion, but instead a core truth and a way that we see the world. And we also discuss how enlightenment is a real, documented, reachable state. So again, I recommend you go to the10worlds.com to take the quiz and find out which world you come from before listening to this conversation. It probably will not surprise you as you learn about the different worlds that I come from, the world of realization. And then just remember that we do reference kind of what's going on in the world a little bit in this conversation. And so we are referring to the COVID-19 pandemic because this conversation was recorded earlier back in May. So that is it. I hope you all enjoy this amazing conversation. Okay, so let's start just with a little bit of kind of your background and your experience and kind of the story of what led you guys to write this book.
Yeah, so actually it's a funny and long and winding road. My best friend Alex and I started this book, believe it or not, almost 25 years ago. It's actually, when I hear that, it's kind of crazy. But we were both graduate students. I was getting my doctorate in psychology, and he was a medical, getting his residency in the University of Iowa. But we had met at the University of Chicago. We started thinking about why people are so bad at being happy. You know, it actually started with my interest in clinical psychology, and really just focused in on the fact that it's just really hard for people to figure out how to fundamentally find happiness for themselves that lasts. Meanwhile, Alex was sort of going on his own sort of spiritual journey where he was open to Eastern philosophy and Buddhism and some of these issues, which ultimately were also searching for the same thing, is that how do you find indestructible happiness, right? And not from sort of the spiritual monk in, a Tibetan monk sense, but in real life, in a real pragmatic way, with all these bad things that happen to you, how do you find happiness that sort of endures? So we decided we wanted to bring sort of philosophy, neurobiology, and psychology together to try to come up with an answer to this that could be a model that everybody could sort of use. And the reason the journey took so long is not only just because he and I went on different paths in our careers and so on, because it took a long time actually for the science to catch up with some of our fundamental core beliefs about this. Even as recent as some recent neuroscience that helped us, fill in some of the gaps and connect the dots at the end here in terms of our model. So it's actually something we've been working on for a long time, something we've been passionate about. And we thought it was a good combination from his perspective, from a medical perspective and scientific perspective, and my perspective from a psychological perspective. It all came together for this book that we just finished a couple of years ago.
I love it. And I think it's such a great combination of, so, your perspective as a psychiatrist, his perspective as a physician, then patients that you're actually treating in kind of their circumstances to give us all like real life examples of how this plays out. And then the conversations between the two of you of really kind of analyzing it. It really just gives like the full picture of all of these 10 worlds that you guys describe in the book.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm actually a clinical psychologist. I'm a psychiatrist, but
sorry.
It's okay. No, it's okay. It's actually, you're right. And the reason we decided to write the book in the form of this dialogue is because to us, it was a journey of discovery. Because while we had some hypotheses about each of the 10 worlds, which I'm sure we'll get into, we wanted to have them be proven out through kind of a Socratic method or through deep interrogation to dig, because we knew that in order to truly have a model that held up to scrutiny, and we still believe that this is something that we'd like to create a dialogue around, that we ourselves have to challenge. And as you noted in the book, that's what we did over the course of the time. And by the way, I should mention that one of the reasons actually that it took us this long also, and you touched on it, Casey, is that finding the right cases took quite a long time to find the right cases that we could use to demonstrate, embody each world was no small task. And so just all this sort of came together. It took a while for it to come together. Right.
Like it'd be unrealistic to think that at just the given moment you guys decided to write this book, you would have 10 patients that are perfect examples of all these different worlds.
Exactly. It took quite a while, and we had to go outside of actually even like clinical cases to some cases that, when we wrote it or that you read it, that are even in the in different settings, such as career coaching and counseling and stuff like that. So, and even supervision as well of different psychologists. So it wasn't just cases; it was finding these people that embodied these worlds that were facing a real challenge in their lives. As you know, in each of these cases, these people are really stuck. And as we uncover in the course of the dialogue in the book, we sort of uncover why they're stuck and why their lives are not able to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about the worlds in general before we kind of go through all 10 of them. Like, what exactly are these different worlds that you guys uncovered?
Yeah. So the simplest way I can sort of give the thesis of the book is that, I think everybody understands, or everybody could probably believe, that the reason we all exist is to try to be happy. What everybody is motivated by at a basic, most fundamental level, the subatomic level, is for us to be happy. And if you ask somebody why they do something, I'm willing to bet you that if you keep asking why and you took that path down, at the end of it, it might take you longer, it might take you anyway, that ultimately they'll have to say, because I think it'll make me happy. Right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's diluted or not, whether it's completely informed or it's for some reason, some belief they hold is because it'll make them happy. Now you can take that argument further and say, well, there's as many beliefs about what happiness is as there are people in the world. And we actually argue in this book that that's actually not quite true. That if you actually took all the beliefs people had about happiness and you tried to boil it down and find a common set of beliefs, that we believe there's fundamentally 10 of those beliefs that all the other beliefs sort of flow into, which is why we call them our core beliefs. Or we actually call them the core delusions. We'll talk about why. And what the world is, what we argue in this book is that your beliefs about happiness themselves are the key, because it's those beliefs that sort of create the world in which you live in. And it's particularly your belief about what you think happiness means. We all have beliefs about different things, but your belief specifically what happiness means gives rise to what we call a world, or which we term sort of your life condition, right? And that's sort of, think about it as sort of the character of your inner life. It's the way you experience the world, your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, your energy level. That's all those things come together to create the way you sort of experience the world. So you have these beliefs that then sort of create these life conditions, these worlds which you see things in and where you exist. And so those are we argue there's 10 of those states, 10 of those life states or worlds. And core to each of them is a belief that you cling to that keeps you there. Now, we will get into the fact that you can move in on to different worlds, but we argue that everybody has sort of a core belief, which is the most prominent belief they have, and they probably spend the most time in that world. So that's what a world is. It's a life condition in which we find ourselves. It's determined by our belief.
Okay, so before because this will all, I think, get more clear as we jump into the worlds. But before we do that, so just to be clear, can we be in more than one world at a time? We're like mostly in one world.
Yeah, you actually can move in and out of different worlds, states. And that can happen very rapidly, or can happen in very long increments of time. But you can definitely hop from one place to another. And once we get into the world, I'll give you some examples of what it means to sort of temporarily enter a world and leave it very quickly versus staying, you're kind of your home base. Sort of. I think it'll make more sense once we talk about the worlds, how that you can apply that in your everyday life.
Okay, perfect. So before we jump into the first one, I do want to talk for a minute about our core affect, because I thought that was really interesting. So explain what our core affect is.
Yeah, so there's this belief that for the longest time, people were trying to understand sort of your core state, like this idea that if you take the sum of the things that make you happy and the sum of the things that make you miserable and make you unhappy, and you sort of try to figure out like how you're feeling any time when you take the plus versus the minus, think of it that way, it sort of gives you this idea of your core affect. So it's this belief that, or the idea that your core affect, you're never without a core affect. You're never without some kind of state in which you are in. And that state is determined by taking all the positives and negatives and start doing the math and interesting, psychological math to determine the place that you're in, which they call the core affect.
Okay. So how does that play into or interact with the worlds we're in?
In a lot of ways, we talk about core affect in the same way we talk about the idea of life condition. And we don't want to really think about it as a hierarchical scale, but the reality is even these worlds are considered lower worlds and higher worlds. And so, when your life condition is high, you tend to experience the world in a very different way. And we can talk about, you tend to be able to overcome things more easily. You tend to not experience a dramatic amount of suffering, no matter what obstacles are thrown at you. You can think about it in terms of, there's some things you just get up and you're sort of on top of the world and you think you can conquer anything, and your life condition is sort of soaring at high. And you just sort of, all these obstacles around you seem like there's things they can overcome, and you're not overwhelmed. And there's other times you have these days where like everything seems like a mountain, right? Mm-hmm. And it's overcome. And if you think about it, maybe a simple way to think about life condition, high versus low, is this: it's the actual obstacle that you face could be the same for two different people. So two people can have the exact same experience. One person sees it as this tremendous obstacle they can't get over, and it can make them miserable and plunge them into a tremendous amount of suffering. Another person can have the exact same experience, and it can actually give them a lot of determination or grit to overcome it, and it actually empowers them. So being broken up with, somebody breaks up with you, you get dumped. Some people, it destroys them, and they get plunged into depression, and they struggle, and they can't get over it. They come to see me. They come to me as a therapist. They tell me all the time. And they develop all these negative ways of dealing with it. It actually impacts their future relationships. Maybe they even don't trust anymore. Like, there's all these things that can happen that you plunge in your life, and you start plunges. Other people, they see it as an experience like, hey, I can get better. What did I learn about myself? You know what? That relationship wasn't really good for me anyway. There's a lot of negativity in that. And they take it as an opportunity to learn or grow from something. Difference, we would say, is what happens is your life condition. If the life condition is high, there's some people with higher life conditions can take the similar event in the world and do something very different with it. So that's just a simple example of how you might think about life condition in terms of high versus low in a very sort of simplistic way.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Let's jump into the worlds. So we'll start at the bottom and work our way up, obviously. All right. So the first one is hell, which of course, that's the bottom.
It's not a mystery here. But I do want to. But again, each of these have very distinct sort of aspects to them that might be different than the way you usually think about the term. So the world of hell is the world of suffering. So in this world, you're sort of all we know is misery. Your energy level is low. You're sort of incapable of taking action to help yourself feel better, and so it is a form of depression or what have you. But the key, and what we'll do here, obviously, Casey, we can get into the core beliefs that behind each of them.
Mm-hmm.
But the core belief that holds people in the world of hell is that they're powerless to end their suffering. Right. So the real hellishness of this world is that when you feel like you can't figure out how to end it, and that's actually what puts people in the world of hell.
So that's the victim mindset that is a buzzword right now.
It's not just a victim mindset, even though we're all feeling incredibly powerless right now because we have no idea how this is going to end, and then there's lots of anxiety and uncertainty. And yes, for a lot of people, that's exactly right. We all feel powerless. So a lot of people are spending a lot of time in hell right now, I would argue, more than ever before. But the distinct part of this is that piece. Because if you're suffering, the difference between, we talk about, as you probably read in the book, the difference between pain and suffering, right? The suffering really comes in when you believe that you can't overcome your pain or you see no way out of it, right? Mm-hmm. You feel pain when you're lifting weights, but you don't suffer, right? Because it's, the pain is actually, it's positive pain, right? Or if you have a problem, but you feel like there's a way out, or you know that there's an end to it in sight, it doesn't necessarily plunge you into the world of hell for a long time because, again, you don't feel powerless to end. So it's really that sense of powerlessness that traps people in the world of hell.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting in the book, how you guys talked about how, studies have shown even just knowing that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So taking like exercise, for example, like knowing there's a finish line, like knowing, the buzzer is going to ding or whatever, helps people to keep going versus if you didn't have that end in sight. I thought that was really interesting. And then I could absolutely see that like in my own life.
Well, and as you know, there's lots of research that shows that even from simple things in terms of everything from lifting weights to going on a diet and all these things. But, it's interesting now, right? Because imagine how different the world would be now if we all knew there was an end date. It would just it would be a fundamentally different psychological experience that we're all having, right? Right now, 90% of probably my view of the anxiety and pain and suffering is that nobody knows how or when this is going to end or how to make it end, right? We're all counting on some biological event for it to happen, but nobody knows how. So everybody's sort of experiencing this world right now, unfortunately.
Right. Because if it was like, oh, okay, in 30 days, snap, everything will go back to normal, we'd all kind of look at this like, okay, I can do this for 30 days. You either kind of hunker down and work on something else to distract yourself, or you go into like vacation mindset, but it's now like within a container versus this unknown, is this going to go on forever, unbearable thought.
Exactly. And people know, whether you lose your job or lose a relationship, it's more over and over when I talk to people in that world, it's really because they can't see an end to the suffering, right? They can't imagine being happy without it. I just had a friend who recently, got dumped for the first time, right? And they just can't imagine being happy, without the relationship. They just think so. They can't. So because they can't imagine that, they are powerless to try to end the suffering that it causes. Right. So it's the belief that has them in their grip. The belief that without this I cannot be happy. And so if that's the case, then how's my suffering possibly going to end if I don't believe I could ever be happy without that person in my life?
Right. So how does one go about kind of getting out of that world? Because I can think of times that I've been there and it's like, while you might logically or intellectually know, like, okay, I'm going to get over this. That's different than really believing it enough to pull you out of that world.
Yeah. So, part of the way to get out in any of these worlds, eventually we talk about this because you're going to see how powerful the beliefs are. I think, trying to understand that the beliefs are true delusions and that these beliefs, how much power your beliefs have, is the first step to understanding that you have power over them, right? That there's a difference between beliefs and reality. And, as you saw in the case that we did, it was really a process of sort of challenging the beliefs and demonstrating evidence over and over again that it's simply not true, right? That the beliefs are just their delusions. It's not true, and they're capable of happiness without it. And so, for a lot of people, it's a natural process that they go through, and for others, grief and going through those stages, all that stuff, that's all very natural. So this obviously becomes a problem when you sort of get stuck and it starts really impacting your ability to life to be happy at all. And then you sort of just get into the concept of the power of therapy and with and cognitive restructuring and the cognitive work you do to help people cling to different beliefs and then help people understand why they might be holding on to that belief, which then might uncover some more deeper seated stuff. So, the process of helping people out of being stuck here is really about trying to understand why they're stuck there, why that belief is so important to them. Why are they holding on to it? Why is it scary to let go of that belief? And then helping them sort of discover that process. I'm talking about therapeutic process now. If it's somebody that's
right. Well, yeah, and you guys. I mean, it's really interesting in the book how you go about that and really kind of dissect the beliefs and get to kind of the true core belief. And so we won't get into that. People have to buy and read the book to do that. But it was super fascinating that it's not always what we think it is kind of at first glance.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the second world because I think this one is pretty prevalent. So the second world is hunger.
Yes. So by the way, I should say that the world of hell is actually sort of an outlier in terms of it's more of it's just a slightly, it's a state that people, it's usually an extreme state. So we're going to start getting into worlds where people spend a lot more time in terms of their defining character and to define core, more so the world of hell, which people sort of fall into generally sometimes based on some things that happen in their lives and then eventually make their way out of it.
Right. I would say the first world of hell and the 10th world of enlightenment are both pretty extreme outliers.
Yes. There's a bell curve here. In fact, I did a little research on that, and I can tell you which of the worlds is sort of a little bit more prevalent than others. And actually, it's not. It's life state, AIDS, and stuff, and all that has something to do with that as well. Hunger is what I thought. So to be honest with you, Casey, I thought this was going to be the most common world that people were in. And in fact, it is true particularly for younger people. We'll talk about that. But the world of hunger is the world is the world of desire, and this is about this sort of obsession or drive to get what you want. That's not where other things sort of get thrown in the background, right? So this is about I have to have this. If I could just have this, I would be happy. If I could just have this, if I could just get that. And then there's this kind of devotion and single-mindedness to trying to get at that. As you can imagine, some of that is good in terms of being driven, but obviously, at times when you're left sort of uninterested in other things or dissatisfied with other things that you have, and being really focused on getting that one thing, it could lead to this obsessive behavior, to be able to achieve that goal at all costs. So this is actually not. This is one of those worlds that it's easy to talk about how people enter it and maybe leave it, right? Because when you get fixated on accomplishing something and it's sort of single-minded and you're working on it and you just got to get it done, you enter this world. You sort of enter the world of hunger. And I think it's good and natural for some people. It's like for athletes who, want to make a team, or when you want to get a good grade, or you want a certain job that you just have to have, or that promotion that you want to get, or even as a person that you want to pursue. But as I say all those things, you can imagine how that can sort of go the wrong way if it becomes too much of your happiness becomes too much attached to it. So again, the belief here is that the core delusion here is that to be happy, I need to get what I want. To be happy with what you want, which then implies the opposite, which is if I don't, I can't be happy. So this is the world where we talk about the analog of like it's a stick of gum. We talk about this a lot. Like it's, you chew you want a piece of gum, you get that sweet hit, but then suddenly you need the next stick and the next stick and the next stick because it's so sweet, but it doesn't last. Right? So people in this world tend to be constantly going from one thing to the other, thinking that next thing they get will make what they need to be happy. But when they get there, they realize it does supply some temporary happiness, but it doesn't invariably fades, right? And then you're on sort of to the next thing, and to the next thing.
Right. This is like that very common story of, living in that, like, I'll be happy when I get that job, get that promotion, get that house, whatever it may be. And then you reach that and you're like, not quite as fulfilled as I thought it was going to be. So then, you pop that other stick of gum and it's on to the next thing.
Yes. Bingo. It's the, if I could just, then I'll be it. If I could just get this job, I can just, and these people particularly are, like they say, sharks, if they're not swimming, they sort of die. True or not, but it's that idea that, if they're not in that pursuit of that next thing, then they just can't figure out how to be happy. We'll talk about the world of rapture later, which is people who are actually very good at getting happiness from the things they want. But in the world of hunger, it's really about this obsessive desire to get the next thing I want.
Well, and I kind of think our current culture forces people into this world because Absolutely. It's very driven on having more and more and more. And then you tie in social media and all that. So then there's a lot of comparison to constantly show you what other people have and how happy they are, which then is going to, drive you to want more and more and just be like hungrier and hungrier.
Yeah, and it's the world. The name is interesting, right? Because and you just used it perfectly. And so, yes, the way the world is getting constructed, it's so easy to sort of always measure yourself against something else, or you have so much visibility what everybody else has. Keeping up with the Joneses is taken to a whole different level than before. So yeah, I think our society makes it easy to feel like there's always more, there's something else, so there's somebody that's always better. And so, yeah, I completely believe the society is constructed in a way to sort of feed into
it. As well as the next world. So then we jump into, and I'm probably going to say this wrong, animality. Yeah. Which is the core belief there is that like happiness and pleasure are the same thing, correct?
Yes. And we all enter this world, even when you're having a piece of chocolate cake. But again, remember the core. Being in these worlds means that you've actually attached happiness to this, and you've lost, versus losing, having the perspective that like, hey, it's okay, so good to indulge in this. So people in this world, and we all know people in this world, are concerned with physical pleasures like food, sex, sleep, and the like, binging on stuff, whether binge watching or whatever. And your lives are, entirely centered around the present moment and satisfaction of your physical needs. Again, while there's some things instinctually that are good for you, keep you safe, and so on, it can actually, obviously, people know it leads to self-destructive behavior. This is the world of addiction, right? In terms of, and so we all know people that are in this world who struggle with this, whether it's to food or to drugs or to anything that people feel, they eschew all kinds of things in their judgment and make all kinds of decisions in their lives that can be destructive to them and others around them in order to satisfy those pleasures. And so, yeah, the world is definitely constructed for this one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like those two world, animality and hunger, almost like orbit each other, because it's like you've got to be chasing all this stuff, which is then going to give you pleasure, which you think is happiness, then you go back into hunger, and then it's like those two, in my mind, kind of play together.
They do, and but they play together because there's this drive, but they're actually, but they're very different in terms of one of them is really about physical pleasure, while the other one is about this achieving these goals. So, I'm not even sure that one necessarily makes you more prone to the other, and it would be natural to think that, but I can't scientifically say that. But I will say that the obsessive nature of it are very similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you could argue that maybe hunger, in a lot of cases, is this pointed in ways that maybe are not so self-destructive. And, extremes they can be, right? The things you could do to get what you want, you could scoop the globe, you could break the law. If you're for money, all kinds of stuff can happen if you're too caught up in the world of hunger. But I think there's a lot of positive manifestations of the world of hunger that helps people accomplish great things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, great things comes from a certain level of obsession, right? Like Michael Jordan is probably the world of hunger most of his life, and which is why he was such an amazing guy. So,
right, but I wonder if he was happy.
I wonder if he was that. Well, it seems like that's a great example, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't happy with football, but he had to go to baseball because he had to conquer something else.
Yep.
So, it's a great example. I even think about that. So, anyway, animality is really about that. Happiness and pleasure are the same, and it's really about physical pleasure.
Okay. All right. So then moving on to the fourth world, which this one I think is interesting, is anger. Tell us about the world of anger.
Yeah. And the world of anger, the wording on this was a little misleading. This is the world of ego, right? And I love this world. We haven't gotten to the world I'm from yet. Next one. But this one, everybody can sort of relate to. It's really the world. It's called the world of ego. I call it the world of insecurity because this is the world in which it's incredibly important for people to be viewed in a positive light. And this is also the place you start talking about this case of people who can be caught up in sort of jealousness and contemptuousness for others who they feel they have to be superior to others. And that can, again, these insecurities can really help you, become very successful, right? They say some of the greatest leaders of our time were driven by, overcoming insecurities. So it can help us compete and succeed. The real negative manifestation for the belief here is to be happy, we have to be better than everyone else, right? So that, again, if you cling to that as your belief or as your delusion, you can imagine this is a world of the need to kind of feel superior, to control, and that can lead to all kinds of negative issues around both in relationships, both personally and professionally. It could lead to a constant sense of sort of uneasiness and anxiety, jealousy, anger. The reason it's called the genesis behind the name is it comes from sort of anger toward inward. So the Buddhists call that term. It's really rage against yourself, which is really what people consider jealousy and insecurity is really this internal seething sort of anger at yourself for not being something or needing to be something that you can't be. Right. That's sort of insecurity. So again, as you saw in the case, this could be something that has some deep-seated, roots in all kinds of things that happen to you. You grow up in your environment. I think this one is one of the worlds where, as a therapist, it's one of the things that you can discover or uncover relatively easily, but it's incredibly, incredibly challenging to help people adjust or confront. So, because insecurity is one of those things that's just incredibly difficult to help people sort of reframe in their minds and their beliefs.
Yeah, I think I've definitely spent time in this world. I might be from this world, as you say. This might be my home planet.
Yeah. You've spent time, I read a little about you. You've spent time in a lot of these worlds.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know where your home planet is. That could be. We'll figure it out after. Did you take the quiz?
No, I haven't taken the quiz yet.
Okay. All right. I'm curious. We'll do that. You can do that afterwards and let me know.
Okay, I will. Okay, so moving on to world number 5. This one I think is super interesting also, Tranquility.
Yeah, this is where I come from. So the world of Tranquility is really about what we call the world of serenity. And so, in one sense, it's about finding some comfort in this status quo and, that it's not about embracing and looking at new risk-taking things. To me, this is a world about, we call it to be happy, you need to avoid pain. So that's somewhat nuanced. So we should talk about this a little bit. It's not really about avoiding physical pain. The role of tranquility is really about this desire for peace of mind and security. And again, the belief that happiness lies in that, right? Not so much that like everybody would like peace of mind in this, but if you really believe that happiness comes from, avoiding kind of emotional pain or bad outcomes, so if you sort of live this life that's sort of like of avoiding really bad stuff happening, that's this world. And as you can imagine, that has interesting implications in how you think about decision making and the paths you choose, the things you want to see for your kids, the things you believe are important, create that sort of security. So for me, the way I didn't think this is where I came. When I started this path, I did not think this is the world I came from. But when we went down this path, it became very clear to me it was. And because I know I'm governed by this core belief, that if I'm trying to avoid bad outcomes. So I struggle all the time with these. I used to struggle with these really big decisions because I would believe that within that making the right decision was happiness. Like I choose the wrong job to take, right? We fill the wrong place. If I choose the wrong spouse, if we don't invest our money the right way, if my kids don't get like the right school, the right class, or all these things cause me so much sort of unsettling anxiety because I believe that that the happiness was sort of contained in making the right decisions there and creating the most security. And the reason it's filled with anxiety, because I believe this world is filled with anxiety, is because you just, that's impossible, right, to control all this stuff or to be right all the time. And B, it's actually a delusion. In fact, research has shown that we are really bad at actually figuring out the decisions that we make, the outcome of the decisions we'll make in terms of happiness. We're usually actually wrong. The decisions we think were going to make us happy, the ones we thought we had to take because we didn't, are actually, we're not very good at it. So we can't even predict very well how the decisions we make are going to make us happy, make us or not make us happy, let alone that our happiness is contained within those decisions. And I think a lot of people, particularly as you get older, a lot of people sort of move into this world. When you're younger and you're driven, you try to accomplish, you don't have a family quite yet. There's not a lot, you don't have a lot to lose, let's just say, in a strange kind of way. You can sort of go down this path of hunger and these pursuits. I think as you get settled and you start having these bigger things, a lot more to lose, people start thinking about peace of mind and security and these things that, if I could just have this much savings, I'll be happy. If my kids just get into these schools, if I can just do this, if I could just not get fired, it's all about if I could just not, versus if I could just get.
Well, and the other interesting thing I think about this one is kind of the avoiding pain, which then ultimately results in like suppressing your emotions and not really even knowing what you're feeling. And I think that can even get confusing as you get into the personal development or certainly the spiritual development world, where it's kind of like you're trying to reach this place where like nothing bothers you. And there's like a big difference between nothing bothering you and suppressing your emotions because you think that's what you're supposed to do to be, in this kind of higher state of consciousness or whatever.
That's a great observation. In terms of you sort of dampen or become sort of numb to certain things, as we showed in the case, in the particular case, because I think that's what you're referring to. Yeah, I mean, taken to an extreme, one way to somebody to manage or avoid that anxiety is to sort of dampen everything and suppress and numb, and that's not a good way to experience life. It might feel safe, but it also makes life a lot less enjoyable.
Yes.
So I was not good at that, which is why I struggled with finding that peace of mind, because instead I would experience as anxiety because I actually couldn't sort of turn that off.
Okay, so moving on to number 6, rapture. What is the world of rapture?
Yeah, so the world of rapture, and this is the last of the lower worlds, as we move into darkness, but it's the highest of the lower worlds. It's sort of actually what I would still consider sort of this plateau point, this turning point. It's actually it's the most interesting and probably slightly hardest to understand or conceptualize worlds, because in a lot of ways, and the reason for that is this is the world in which most people think happiness, the scale. If I was going to say there's a scale in the world of happiness that people have, and most people in the world, this is where they would say the scale ends. Right? And part of the reason Alex and I wrote this book is because we believed that this is the most happiness people thought existed, and we thought there was a happiness that moved beyond that. and then obviously to the world of enlightenment. But this is the world where people believe your happiness is dependent. The core delusion here is that happiness is dependent on specific attachments. And this is going to seem very intuitive to people because, like I said, most people think this is what happiness is. And what I mean by that is, I'm happy because of the things that I have in my life: my wife, my kids, my job, my house, my money, my parents, all these things in which we gain joy from make us happy. And the reality is they do make us happy, right? They make people very happy. And it can be a happiness that actually lasts a long time as well. But the delusion here is that, and it's written very specifically, our happiness is dependent on a specific attachment, right? So people believe that, for example, it's my wife that makes me happy, not a wife that makes me happy. Or it's my job, not a job, or whatever that specific things might be. But the reality is that's actually not a real lasting happiness, because what happens if you lose it? Because it's those very same things that you attach your happiness to that could be what could have you plunge into the world of hell and be the cause of your greatest joy when you lose them. Like if somebody dies, you lose your job, what have you. So now, I will say that people in the world of rapture tend to be pretty good at getting a lot of joy from the things that they do have, right? Different from the people like the world of hunger. So somebody in the world of rapture could have a car and they could love it. Like I have a buddy who has, like, he gets so much joy in his life from this, his car that he drives around, and it's very real, right? And it gives him really real joy. Obviously, if somebody stole it or wrecked it, it would plunge him into the world of hell, at least for a little bit of time. But the delusion here, right, is that it's a specific attachment. When we argue in the book that it's not about the specific attachments that matter. So it's really, having any attachment. Now, again, this is not this idea of, this kind of Zen Buddhist concept that you shouldn't have any attachments.
Yeah, I was going to say this one's very Buddhism.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. I want to correct that, because it's not really about. There's nothing wrong with having attachment, and there's nothing wrong with getting happiness from attachments. The only argument we're making is that there is a happiness that can come, that's actually greater than this type of happiness that's achievable. And it makes the point that, the reason we call all these delusions, we didn't get into that, but like every one of the things we're talking about here, we say there's 9 core delusions, right, about beliefs of happiness. And the reason we call them delusions is because not that they don't bring you temporary happiness, is that they don't bring you indestructible or lasting or enduring happiness.
Right.
So that's where each of them sort of fails. But again, people can exist if you can spend a lot of your time in the world of tranquility and piece together. You can piece together a phenomenally, happy life on this stuff, but or a rapture. And so, but again, those things ultimately will be taken away from you in one way or the other. And for a lot of people also it does fade, right? So just like the concept of hunger, even though this might last longer, ultimately these attachments start to lose the meaning, and you start looking for more. The midlife crisis concept that sort of comes out of here, and those certain things are sort of born from the fact that the specific attachments can only last so long.
Yeah, I feel like culture really shoves this delusion down our throats in terms of relationships a lot too, of the, better half and you complete me, and like that whole concept that we're not, that happiness without, that specific attachment doesn't exist, almost like it's dependent on it.
That's exactly right. And it's not like, the problem is that when you talk about this, it goes all automatically to this Zen Buddhist, I have to give up all worldly desire kind of concept. And that's too binary, and it's not really the right way to think about this. It's just it's really about, how you think about the happiness that you should place on attachments. Ultimately, everybody should know could be very fragile. And so you should not be surprised if it plunges you into, if it plunges into some hell when something happens to it, or this attachment that you have.
Right, because it's the dependency component, that your happiness depends on this attachment. So take away the attachment, and then you're going to plummet down into hell.
Yes.
Okay, Cool. Okay, So now we get into the higher worlds. All right. So number 7 is learning. Tell us about that world.
Yeah. And so the world of learning is the world of mastery. And this is really the world where, you believe that to be happy, you have to accomplish or experience meaningful things. So this is really that world of, you can call it the world of curiosity, that there's a desire to learn and accomplish something that creates value or meaning. And again, there's so much, that's the reason it's a higher world. This is as you can imagine, that's a very high cause. Now, it can lead to negative things. It can lead to people to neglect other things in their lives, life and so on. So if Alex is on with us, he comes from this world, and he would tell you all the negative parts of it, which I'll talk about in a second. I think it's kind of interesting. But in terms of this world, this is like, this is the belief that, in order to be happy, I need to create something meaningful, whether that's building a company or writing a book or helping people or creating specific art, but it comes from creating something of meaning. The reason this happiness tends to be more enduring than happiness from the other worlds is because this is, as you can imagine, this comes from creating something that sort of can't be taken away, right? Like, for example, writing this book, right? That accomplishment can technically never be taken away. Now, the amount of joy I gain from it can be, which is exactly what Alex will tell you, is that like he has a heart when he's not in the throes of doing something like this or writing or painting. He's a phenomenal painter. He feels he can't be fun, like his level of happiness diminishes, right? And people in the world of learning can easily fall into the world of hunger in the pursuit of the same thing, of something like that, like they're trying to create. But the reason this is a higher world is because it does bring in a type of happiness that's attachment more to creating value than to things, right? Which tends to be more enduring and can't be so easily snapped away from you, pulling you into all kinds of different places, right? So that's the world of learning, and which is going to be very, very closely attached to the next world. But that's the first of the higher worlds.
Okay, so that makes sense because it's a similar concept to the world of hunger in that you accomplish, you do something, you get something, you reach something, you accomplish something, and there is that kind of initial joy, happiness, but that it will fade over time, and then you kind of stay in that cycle.
Yeah, it can, right? They tend to be more enduring. People in the world of learning, it tends to be.
It's probably a longer
because
cycle.
It can come from experiencing something meaningful, being like the involvement in creating some kind of meaning or being involved in something of meaning. It could be like building a great company. But the experience itself and the process itself lends that person, that lends to a sense of happiness and joy. Versus the world of hunger, it's really about, there's no like joy until you accomplish it, right? And then it fades immediately. While, for example, somebody could be writing a book for a decade, and in the process of writing that book could be something that brings a tremendous amount of joy through the entire process, that creation process. So, it's a different level of sort of attachment to a particular specific outcome versus to the experience or accomplishment of something that creates sort of long-lasting value or meaning.
Right. Or like spending all this time raising a child or children, yes. Very, very meaningful, but then they're grown up and they leave the house and Okay. Okay. So, all right. So then jumping to the next world of realization.
Well, the realization is the world of self-improvement. The core delusion here is that to be happy, we need to grow, right? So this is really this obsession with self-examination, which can lead to great personal growth, but also can lead to sort of self-absorption and some other things as well. So this is really the belief that to be happy, I have to constantly be getting better or growing as a person or improving in some way.
This world hits me on a deep level. So there's such an interesting part of my book that I wrote, which really kind of captures this just really interesting change in my life. But there's literally this part where I like jump from the world of learning to realization. And I captured it all in writing without even realizing it, because I talk about how I had done all these great accomplishments, like got an MBA and ran a full marathon, but I never felt like they didn't give me the fulfillment I want. And then I have this literally this realization where I'm like, now I realize it's not the accomplishment, it's the growth that's supposed to come from it. I didn't see the growth. And so I literally am talking about how I think that I need growth in order to be happy.
Yep. I thought this was the world I was going to be in. And I definitely entered this world a lot. But, at my core, if I had to really ask myself, and again, I'm not saying this is like a Myers-Briggs where you can be heavily up, but the concept of how strongly you hold these beliefs is, as you probably remember from the book, a critical part of the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
The stronger you believe these things, the easier they get stirred up or activated and play a role in your life, and the less you believe them, the sort of harder and harder it is to sort of really have them stirred up for you. So this one gets stirred up for me fairly easily. So it's obviously a belief I hold pretty strong. And I think the reason it's one of these higher worlds is because, well, sure, while it can lead to somebody being self-obsessed and absorbed and neglect other things, the reality is that most often, a person's dedication to growth and self-improvement often has really positive impacts to the world around them and the relationships around them. More often than not. And so there's a lot of good you're putting into the world, I think, by trying to focus on becoming a better person and trying to understand yourself. So again, we're starting to creep up towards sort of delusions that a lot of people wish they sort of had.
Right. And I think that I would say I think I'm in the realization world now, or that's where I spend the majority of my time. I think I have days or moments where I hop up into the next world, but I think I'm an 8. But I don't think I'm super attached to it. But I think that's definitely where I spend the majority of my time right now.
That's great. And I sense that, by the way, from reading the things you write. So, and by the way, the fact that, and not only that, Casey, but the fact that you're doing this, right, is an indication of both the world of learning and realization, I think.
Right.
For you, for sure.
Okay. So, all right. So we're getting up to the top tier here. So, okay. The 9th world is compassion.
9th world is compassion. So this world is the world of love, right? And people in this world, the actions they take, is for the sake of others, and their commitment to making other people happy is what gives them the most sense of fulfillment. And so here, the delusion, which is now getting to the point of it's hard to say this is a delusion,
right?
But to be happy, we need to make other people happy. And again, the reason the way it's worded is that we need to make other people happy. So again, we probably all know somebody like this, and we probably are concerned about their level of sort of self-neglect sometimes, and even some resentment if people aren't as accepting of it or kind of see the world in the same way they do. But again, this is the Mother Teresa concept, right? And again, we should all wish to spend a lot of time in this world, and we all enter it at some point in time. We all experience it as parents or as, particularly if I don't want to get into gender things, but I think mothers are wired this way for certain things, but again, for better or for worse.
Mm-hmm.
But again, your commitment in your life to making other people happy in the sense of fulfillment, it comes with that. If you're a person that defines that as what makes them happy, and more than all else, you sort of come from this world. It's really kind of funny, Casey, because if you take the quiz, you'll see there's just 2 parts to it. One of them just kind of helps you kind of understand your beliefs. The second part is sort of more forces you to actually sort of rank what's really important to you, the most important to you, if you just have to be honest with yourself. And it was so funny because I had people take it, and friends, and even at my work, a bunch of people took it, and they're all like, "Man, I really wanted to put this one on. I
wanted to feel this way, but
if I have to truly be honest with myself, is my life filled with actions that demonstrate this as my most powerful belief?" And most people have to. Some people do, but very few people. And so, but what a phenomenal place to be in if you really derive happiness from that making others happy.
Right, exactly. Not a bad delusion at all. But explain why it. I guess where it can go wrong. Is it that the kind of the same thing that could be taken away from you, like the ability to make other people happy? I guess that would only exist if you were like living out in the woods by yourself.
The way it sort of goes wrong is, think about it like, this is extreme, like becoming an enabler, like doing, not being, not sensing people appreciate it, and so then feeling sort of feeling a little resentful that people that you're not taking care of yourself. This involves self-sacrifice. If it goes too far, then you are making sacrifices, and eventually you will sort of resent if, for example, what you're doing isn't having an impact and not being recognized, or over time, if it feels taken advantage of. So there's a balance between deriving your happiness from helping others, but at the same time, taking care of yourself. It's not at all costs, right? And so that's why we talk about there's some resentment can sort of come in. We sort of start seeing it a little bit in the case, but that's, again, now we're sort of having to really look hard to find the negative. As we went down the world initially, Alex and I struggled to find some of the positives in some of the on some of the worlds, and then we moved into trying to struggle to find some of the negatives, right? Which is natural.
Right. Okay. All right. So the final world number 10, enlightenment, which couldn't have picked a better word for that world.
Yeah.
So, attempt to describe enlightenment.
I will say, this is where I always wish Alex was with me on some of these interviews, because I would be not doing justice to recognize that this is something he's been studying for 2 decades. I'd say he's one of the leading experts in the world at understanding this concept in a very real way. So I'll try to do it justice. So this is not, the world of enlightenment is, the one thing that's different about it. It's not about a belief. It's about a way of experiencing the world. So there's a big difference in terms of how you experience the world of enlightenment and how the beliefs play a role in this. So, and again, what's really important, and I think this is my favorite chapter, by the way. I'll give Alex a lot of credit. This was really his baby. But the interesting thing about this world is it's not about this concept of enlightenment, which he talks about, which is a spiritual sort of thing, which is about people chanting, and you have this sense of Zen or whatever. That's not really what it's about. In fact, the way we talk about the world of enlightenment is a very real neurological sort of experience. And we point out the fact that throughout history, from the beginning of time, when we were able to have people talk about these enlightenment or awakening experiences, they all talk about them in the same way, like they describe the same experience. And there's a few different aspects to that, but the key part of this is this. It's this, when we talk about it, that the core belief here, the core truth rather than the core delusion, is that the universe and everything in it is sublime. And it's really, we talk about enlightenment as the world of awe, right? So it's this ability to see everything from this sort of awe or almost childlike wonder in the world, and to experience everything with this amazing sense of awe. And we talk about, you kind of experience like when children, everything they sort of experience that's new that we see all the time, they might have this different experience of it, like they're in awe of it or amazed of it, and it's something that maybe we like. What's so interesting about that spoon? I don't understand this. But the world of enlightenment is sort of the ability to sort of see that in things that normally we take for granted. And so the way into this world is through we talk about the experience of awe, and it sort of it's this place of this experience where you still have all these different beliefs that you have. You still can feel passion and joy. You can actually enter these other worlds. The difference is the absence of suffering, right? So the experiences you have are absent of this suffering, so that even when you lose attachments or you fail to go or accomplish something, you still feel sadness. You still have the experiences. You're not in this sort of trance-like state. It just doesn't cause you to suffer in any in this way. And Alex and I both talk about in the book, we each had our own sort of awakening experiences, and both of us, we both sort of entered them slightly differently. For me, it was through a significant amount of moment of tremendous amount of suffering and fear that sort of sparked in me an experience I had, which I talk about in the book. And for Alex, it was a little similar, but it was much more about like this gaze into nature that did that. And there's a lot of research that shows that it's actually the experience of things in nature and great vistas and so on that help people kind of enter this state.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I think a couple of things are important to note about it is that your sense of sort of how you experience the world when you're in the state of enlightenment is not. It's not like it's like a meditation where everything is dampened. And the difference between the world of being in this state versus being in like a meditative state is, everything is still there. Your senses are there, your awakening is there, you're still fully immersed in your environment versus the sense of meditation where you're sort of in this, and everything is sort of quieted and you're not fully engaged in your environment, right? Because actually meditation is sort of escaping from reality to that. The fear of death sort of evaporates. But part of the experience of enlightenment is the fear of death is sort of gone. And there is this experience which does get very spiritual, which is this idea that there's this clear connectedness of things.
Mm-hmm.
That everything, there's sort of this perfect harmony, and everything in your place in that world is very clear. And so, those are sort of, I think, key distinctions between the world of enlightenment and sort of this other things that we talk about, whether it's flow or Zen or some of these other things that people have talked about when they enter these sort of states.
Right. One of the things I love about this world is that it's like it moves from beliefs, like attachment to beliefs, to like a truth. So, we have all these core delusions, which are essentially a belief about happiness in these other worlds. And then in the world of enlightenment, it's a knowing. It's just a knowing of just a truth, like, which seems very simple, but is by no means easy to travel to that world.
No, it's not. And look, and there's been some interesting research that they've used psilocybin drug that they've been able to sort of induce these people into this state. And that's where a lot of the kind of neurological research has come in terms of them being able to help people enter the state and then kind of study it. The one thing that's interesting is that what you just said in terms of that it's a truth is that one of the key gateways into this is sort of this idea of the diminishing of the sense of self. And this gets into a little bit of the kind of the nuances of psychology in terms of we experience the world from the perspective of us experiencing the world, like the sense of self. You see everything's a sense of self, and people enter the state sort of that sense of self sort of disappears, right? So you're not experiencing the world through me, right? You're experiencing the world, period, sort of in this way, and you're just sort of and you sort of are a part of it. They call it the autobiographical self, like because the self that sort of writes the script that's there. When that sort of gets quieted, then you can sort of be free from these beliefs. You free yourself from these beliefs that you cling to. It's almost like when you're born, you don't have any of these core beliefs, right? You develop these over time, And so, what would it be like if you're experiencing the world without clinging to any of these? And that's why we call it a core truth.
Right, because it's like the sense of self is the separation, like the gate between us and the universe, life,
Yes.
the world. And so if you're able to dissolve that, which is kind of formed from all these core beliefs that were piled onto us over the years, which is why then children and babies are much more because they don't have all those layers yet. So if you're able to peel those back and kind of dissolve that sense of self, then that's when you get to that place of like oneness, that it's all, we're all one. And then this can get like super, spiritual and woo woo, but I'm on board. I'm totally on board.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. I mean, it is like, look, in the life condition of enlightenment, we do feel a sense of unity with our surroundings. Like you lose your sense of self, and you gain a sense of being larger, truer kind of self. You do feel a tremendous amount of feeling of compassion and love for others. So there's a large component of that world in there. And you actually kind of, you sort of awaken to the fact that there is a greater truth but that you can't really express, and it transcends sort of your sense of joy, and that's when you lose your fear of death. So it's like it's interesting because that sounds very mystical, but the experience
Well,
of actually realizing that there's something that's a greater truth, that you just feel it, is a very real thing, right?
oh yeah. And I mean, then the kind of inability to express it. I mean, that's why the majority of mystics, including like Buddha, Jesus, all talked in parable, because we
Yeah,
don't really have human words to describe something that is so much bigger.
that's right. And in terms of people ask about how to, it's not easy. We can perhaps best, we talk about the best way to enter the world life condition is to reduce your sense of being a self. The best way to reduce that is by generating a feeling of awe. And the way that you can try to generate a feeling of awe is sort of by learning to see the world as sublime. So that's sort of the what we thought was the best sort of path into this. And definitely my experience entering it came from, I think, sense of awe. For me, it was a particular site. For Alex, the same way. And a lot of people have described this experience in that as well. Now, how you hold on to it and cling to it in a day to day, it's hard, but it's worth the pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
And we wrote this book. Alex and I had our own different. Everybody has different personal reasons for doing something like this. It takes so much time. For Alex, this was really for him about he believed that there was something very real that existed here, and he wanted to demystify it. He's one of the most pragmatic, believe it or not, people you're ever going to meet, and he's a scientist and a very successful medical doctor, and so he for him it was important to demonstrate that this is a biological and neurological event, not mysticism.
Right.
And so, so I think that it gets really critical. For me, it was I come at it from as a psychologist, which is like, understanding these beliefs, understanding the grip they have on you, is the first way to gain power over them. And it can help reduce a tremendous amount of suffering in the world, and help people, find more enduring happiness. Even if it means spending a little more time in certain worlds or others, or moving around, or understanding or seeing that, or confronting the reality about yourself. And so, so I think even though we came at this from different perspectives, one way to actually help challenge your beliefs that you might cling to is if you believe that this state is a very real state, and we all try to pursue it. As corny as it sounds, that's sort of the way we get to sort of world harmony and peace and all that. We imagine if everybody believed that this was a real state and very attainable, we would be living in a very, very different world, in my view.
I completely agree. And that's why I think the book and the material, it's so powerful in the way it's presented, is that you guys do include those different perspectives. So you have the very pragmatic and the medical doctor, and then you come in with the psychology element, and then you tie in this, the research and statistics. And so I think it definitely accomplishes that goal of making it seem or proving that it is attainable, which you didn't have to convince me going into reading the book, but I understand a lot of people maybe do need some convincing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I was honestly, when I first opened the book, I knew I was going to like it because I flipped to the back, the back picture of all the different worlds and just kind of glance over them. And I'm like, oh, I love this. But I've been very excited to talk to you and hear you go through all of them. And I'm just sure my listeners have or will enjoy it as well. So tell everybody where they can find more information on you, the book, buy it, follow you, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So we have you can go to the10worlds.com and you can read a little bit about the book and about us, and you can take the quiz, or it's not really a quiz, it's a self-assessment. It'll take you a few minutes, and it will tell you what world we believe is your home state, or your core planet. I like the word you use there, Casey. It was your planet.
Yeah, my home planet.
Yeah, your home planet. I like that. Your home planet. We might steal that. And then you can go to buy it at Amazon or any place you go buy books. You can also buy the Audible and the Kindle, all that good stuff there as well. In terms of how you follow us, you can find that on the site.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure, my pleasure.
All right, that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please take a few minutes to rate and review the podcast. I would very much appreciate that. I don't really know what's going to air next week. It might be two different conversations about friendship, or I might be switching gears a little bit. So make sure you are subscribed so that you don't miss whatever comes. And remember, you can always reach me at thebetteryoupodcast@gmail.com if you have feedback or input or suggestions, anything. Would love to hear you all's thoughts. You can also follow the podcast on the socials, on Instagram and Facebook at The Better You Podcast. And I think that's it. Thank you again for listening so much. I hope everyone is doing well, and I will see you all next week.